Hi, my name is Shreyas Kolwalkar, and in my research paper, I researched the long-term effects of AI automation on society. So this presentation is organized into 6 main sections: the problem, in which I identify why AI should be such a concern to us; the perspectives I held on AI both before and after the research process; my thesis or my final view on AI; a topic overview in which I explain my main points and substantiate my thesis; some questions and answers I had during the research process; and some opposing views I address in my paper and explain exactly how I address them. So first, the problem. Why should AI be such a concern to us? So there's 3 big reasons why AI should be concerning to us, and I address them on my paper. They're unemployment, creativity, and critical thinking. As for unemployment, generative AI's ability to replace simple cognitive work has put people across jobs and markets out of business. This is substantiated by some statistics published by the Budget Lab at Yale University. They used a metric called the dissimilarity index to determine that AI has displaced more people from jobs than past technologies like computers and the internet. In addition, the AI unemployment crisis is unique in that it affects a different segment of the industry. For example, it'll impact white-collar jobs like information, finance, and business services rather than blue-collar jobs. In addition, using generative AI for cognitive work decreases our own cognitive activity, making us dependent on AI. In the future, this could hinder our creativity and critical thinking abilities. So the graph here is from an MIT study which used electroencephalography to determine how we reacted when given AI on an essay writing task. And the study found that we become cognitively lazy. In other words, we choose not to use our brains when we're given the choice to use AI. And so that's going to weaken those muscles that think and create for ourselves. And so as a result of that, we'll become less cognitively sharp and less creative. Lastly, this decision must be made now. As AI becomes more omnipresent, we must decide the degree to which we want it to impact our lives, because making the wrong decision could result in the downfall of human society. Next, perspectives. How has research shaped my perspective on AI? Before doing research on AI, I was strongly against its presence in our lives. Knowing the impacts that it has had on creativity and critical thinking, as well as its ethical implications, I felt like AI should be removed from our lives entirely. Now, after doing research on AI, I hold a more moderate perspective. Most research indicates that AI may facilitate social improvement, and my perspective has shifted to reflect that. In addition, I now realize that AI will not be able to be removed from our lives entirely at this point. Too many people are using it. However, I still hold the perspective that AI must be used responsibly, as using AI may also result in social detriment that must be sidestepped. Next, my thesis. What's my final verdict on the development of AI? So my thesis has 3 main parts, 2 main parts regarding unemployment and cognition. So in my thesis, I do concede that AI has had current negative impacts on unemployment, but it is limited in the sense that it is entirely limited to certain repetitive cognitive functions. In other words, AI has never been able to think for itself, so there will be some white-collar cognitive work that is still available. In addition, just like other technologies, like writing, AI may facilitate new employment sectors and labor markets, decreasing unemployment in the long term. Regarding cognition, AI has had current negative impact on cognition, and I concede that. However, productivity improvements can limit the amount of busy work we do, so we can spend more time thinking about the things that actually require human attention. And additionally, cognitive impacts are limited as long as we set healthy boundaries with AI. Ultimately, the final verdict I came to is that AI must be used responsibly to truly facilitate social improvement. Next, the topic overview, in which I substantiate the claims I made in my thesis. Regarding unemployment, I concede that AI will hurt the labor market in the short term, as is reflected by those Budget Lab statistics, but I argue that it will improve the labor market in the long term. So to substantiate this, I used a source that was an Institute of Labor Economics write-up on how AI will impact our lives, and they compared ChatGPT and other AIs to writing, because writing put rote experts, which were people who knew a bunch of stories and would memorize them in ancient Greece, out of business. But those rote experts also became the most adaptable to new careers that were facilitated by writing. For example, how writing facilitated authors back in the day. And so the author argued in that paper that AI will ultimately foster new jobs in the long term. Although we don't exactly know what that is right now. So there is some ambiguity there. But overall, most research is agreeing that we will end up in that direction. In fact, AI will make people more productive at their current jobs, allowing them to focus on more cognitively demanding tasks. In a study that assessed recent engineering graduates and how AI has impacted their jobs, the study concluded that it has not impacted four main functions of engineering. And so the engineers are still doing their jobs. They're not exporting that part of their jobs to AI, but it is helping them um, automate the administrative and busy work functions of their jobs, therefore making them more productive and focusing on the actual engineering parts of their jobs. Secondly, I argue that AI will reduce the learning curve around certain forms of creativity, making access to creativity easier. I cited a study in the University of Helsinki where they talked about using an AI-generated poetry machine, and the study determined that it lowered the barrier for lower secondary students to get into poetry by giving them samples to work off of and providing them assistance with getting the complicated thoughts onto the paper and in those poetic structures. And so it lowered the barrier around poetry, allowing more people to share their own idiosyncratic, uniquely human views. And then additionally, since AI is entirely based on already created work, it can never create something truly original, meaning that humans are ultimately still the drivers of creativity. Lastly, AI and critical thinking research indicates that we demonstrate the highest cognitive potential when assisted with AI across various metrics from cognition to empathy and all sorts of social and academic skills. But I will concede that those benefits only exist when AI is present with the user. As such, we must maintain boundaries with AI to enjoy its benefits. AI can help us think through things better and learn stuff easier, but we can't let it think for us entirely. We can't just be spoon-fed by AI. So I do have a germane piece of information to bring up regarding that. The concept of everyone using AI responsibly is simply impossible. People think short-term. They'll export their cognition to AI entirely, even if it hurts their own cognition and society in the long term. As such, strict legal frameworks may be useful to regulate AI-generated work, and AI education must be implemented in our schools and workplaces to ensure that everyone knows that AI must be used responsibly. We as people in the society need to keep each other accountable to the vision of responsible AI as well. Questions and answers. So what I was wondering most about what researchers thought on AI was, what stance do they take? I was surprised to find that most research indicates that generative AI is positive for us. And now we don't know who is paying these researchers or who is funding their projects, but I was surprised to see across the board that most research indicates that generative AI can make us better at life. In addition, I was wondering what researchers think we should be using AI for. Most researchers should argue that AI should be used to automate simple cognitive tasks and enhance our ability to comprehend and learn. Now, on the other hand, I was wondering what researchers think we shouldn't be using AI for. They didn't have consensus on that one thing in particular, but they did agree that we should be avoiding using AI to the point where we're exporting our entire cognition to AI. And that's the stance I take in my paper, ultimately. Lastly, building off of those questions, I was wondering that if most research indicates that AI has positive impacts, then why is popular opinion against AI? It's because many people assume the worst for AI, a world where it controls our minds and our jobs, and it makes the rich richer and ruins our lives. What they don't realize is that AI can avoid those detriments if used right. Lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit about contrarian views in my paper and how I address them. So, as for creativity, some people argue that AI will hinder our creativity. If we use AI for creative purposes, we limit ourselves to the scope of the AI model's data, in other words, works that already exist. And like any other muscle, we'll lose our creative mind as a result. But I want us to view AI as an enabler, not a limiter. We shouldn't be limiting ourselves to what ChatGPT generates. We should be using it as an assistance to create truly original works that express us as humans. So an assistant, a means to an ends, as an example. Additionally, some people argue that AI will hinder our critical thinking. If we use AI to think, we limit ourselves to what AI machines and their controllers want us to think. But we should see AI as a source, another source of information in addition to the news media and social media and Google, not a replacement for all of those sources and the thinking function where we analyze those sources and reflect on them. In addition, some people argue that AI will facilitate unemployment, but as I've already mentioned, it will not eliminate jobs. It will facilitate restructuring of the market. Just like past technologies have, as evidenced by the Institute of Labor Economics, people unemployed by AI will shift to new AI-driven jobs. Lastly, some people argue that AI will facilitate codependency, but if we have the right mindset, treating it like a tool, a source, if you will, and not a play toy to do everything for us and make us cognitively lazy, we won't be dependent on it to think, to create, and be human. So that's all I have. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope that's a good overview on how generative AI has impacted our lives and how I believe it will impact our lives in the future. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Goodbye.